And welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Research Works.
Yes, welcome back.
We are so excited to be speaking to you all and to our special guest today, and it's another wonderful episode we've got planned for you. We're going to be talking to Dr. Georgina Clutterbuck from the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of Queensland. And as we're talking today, the article that we're going to be discussing is actually really hot off the press. It was published in Disability and Rehabilitation in 2022, and the article is titled "Sports Stars, a practitioner-led peer group sports intervention for ambulant children with cerebral palsy. Activity and participation outcome of a randomised control trial." Hi, Georgina.
Hello.
Hello. It's so great to be here speaking to you today.
And we're so excited to be speaking to you about this work and, you know, your whole body of work, which was recognised at the Oz Academy for Cerebral Palsy and Developmental Medicine as a PhD platform. And for those who've listened to our episode with Dr. Taylor Penny, they'll know that this is actually really prestigious and such a fantastic opportunity for you to be able to share your work with, you know, that audience. So congratulations.
Thank you. It was great to speak both with Penny, Taylor and Tasneem as well.
Yeah.
Such different projects that we all had, but all really fantastic to hear about.
Yeah.
Oh, so wonderful to hear it all.
Yeah.
It really was great.
And really speaks to the quality of what you've done. So, yeah, huge congratulations. For our listeners, we're going to share a bit with you about Georgina. Georgina is a physiotherapist by background, and she's always been really passionate about supporting children and adults with neurological impairments to participate in physical recreation and sport. Georgina's research explores the effectiveness of practitioner-led peer group sports interventions to support children with disabilities, helping them to transition from health-focused interventions into long-term participation in community sport. She's designed and evaluated the Sports Stars intervention for children with cerebral palsy in a Queensland-wide randomised control trial and qualitative follow-up. The positive results reported in conferences across North America, Europe and Australasia. Georgina's current research explores the effectiveness of practitioner-led peer group sports interventions within different cultures and for children with other disabilities.
Georgina, I've absolutely loved the work that you have done. Like, I remember meeting you when you were back in Perth a few years ago, just before the lockdowns. And I remember you're sitting there getting your article, I think, submitted. And I think you just got word that an article was being published, and to see where you are now and all the work that you have contributed to that's actually so translatable is absolutely wonderful. So yeah, a huge congratulations for all of that, Georgina.
Thank you. It's a world away from 2018 pre-COVID, isn't it?
Absolutely.
That conference feels like a lifetime away, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
Well, a lot's happened since then, and a lot of, you know, your work, as Dana was saying, has kind of come to fruition and publication since then, and we're really excited to talk to you about it. But before we get started, you might have listened to episodes before where we do a little icebreaker question, so we thought we'd get started with that. And today's icebreaker question is, what was your favourite subject at school?
I was a huge nerd at school, so my favourite subject was physics. I just absolutely loved the maths and I guess the practicality of the maths in the physics. So unlike, you know, maths B where it's all a bit theoretical, in physics it was fantastic to see how it would affect, you know, I was big into horses in high school as well. So I did a project on the physics of show jumping and how all that maths works in the world.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, Georgina, we have a lot in common.
I was thinking about my favourite subject, and it wasn't maths or physics, because I felt like my first one was lunch, and you always hear those kids go, lunch is my favourite subject. Then I go, okay, don't be so bad, Dana. So my next favourite subject was Friday afternoon when the teacher didn't really want to teach and put on the TV and there was Round the Twist. I don't know if anyone remembers that.
Yes.
That one. I would love those. So all of that doesn't involve learning. So if I have to go to something that's learning, it probably would be chemistry, only because chemistry was something that had quite a clear solution to. I love the formulas and
titrations.
That was really cool. And then you just felt like such a scientist, like transferring a liquid from one beaker to the other.
Yeah.
And occasionally the Bunsen burner would just be like a little bit too hot, and it was like, oh my goodness, this is very cool.
I actually set my hair on fire with a Bunsen burner once.
Oh no.
Yeah. I had really, really long hair in high school, and I obviously wasn't paying good enough attention to what I was doing at the time. And what is that smell? It smells like burning hair. Oh, it's mine. Okay.
I love that.
Yeah.
See what would have come out. I didn't know that about you.
Yeah, almost burnt my hair off with a Bunsen burner. But
so what's your
so chemistry
subject?
wasn't really my favourite subject. I loved physics, but I also really loved phys ed. So which
makes sense.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
I loved sport as a teenager. Still love sport now. And I'm excited to talk about sports stars today.
Nice segue.
I know, right?
I didn't see that one coming. Well done. It's like the penny just dropped.
So I'm obviously really keen for lots of reasons to talk to Georgina about this paper today. And one of them being that, sport was my favourite subject at school.
I think she may have planned that. That was a really good one.
I promise I didn't.
Well done. I like it. Well, I'll tell everyone why we're so excited about this paper now.
Absolutely.
And where sport comes into it.
Let's get into it.
All right, let's get into it. So here is a bit of a summary of the work we're going to be discussing today. So in this study, the researchers investigated the effectiveness of a practitioner-led peer group sports intervention in a waitlist randomised controlled trial in 54 children with cerebral palsy, GMFCS Levels I and II, aged between 6 and 12 years. So in the intervention, which is called Sports Stars, it included 8 weeks, which equated to 8 hours, of physiotherapist-led sports-specific gross motor activity training, sports education, teamwork development, and confidence building. The outcomes included self-identified participation goals as well as physical competence measures at pre, post, and 12 weeks post-intervention. The results demonstrated that after participating in the Sports Stars intervention, participants demonstrated clinically significant improvements on self-identified, sports-focused participation and activity level goals. These self-reported outcomes were supported by significant improvements in physical activity competence for locomotor and object control skills on the test and gross motor development second edition.
So there's a lot to cover today, Georgina. And as I said, really excited to get started. But I thought we could, before we get into the details of the paper, perhaps you could explain to our listeners what Sports Stars is and how it came to be developed.
Absolutely. So Sports Stars, as we said, it's an 8-week program, and that's quite short in terms of intervention programs, just 8 hours of therapy. And the point of that is that it's designed as a transition program to help kids to transition from individual physiotherapy or other therapies and into then long-term community sport, whether that's mainstream or whether that's parastream sport. So it's designed as that transition program, as that little bit of a top-up to help develop kids' physical, social, cognitive and psychological competence to be able to transition confidently and enjoyably into community sport. So I originally developed this program when I was working in disability services out in Ipswich, and did it with kind of a younger group of kids with a variety of different disabilities. Okay. And then when I moved over to the Cerebral Palsy League, I adapted the program for kids with cerebral palsy in that 6 to 12-year-old age range. So it's gone through a few different adaptations, and now what we're looking at doing is seeing how it adapts into a whole range of other communities and kids with different disabilities. So it's one of those programs that's designed to be able to be adapted so that as many kids as possible can benefit for that transition into community sport.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. Yeah. And the adaptation of Sports Stars for children with cerebral palsy. The focus of this paper is on GMFCS Levels I and II. Could you talk to us about some of the I suppose, the barriers or challenges that kids that are GMFCS levels 1 or 2 might face when it comes to community sport participation?
Yeah, so this is a really lovely group of kids because they typically are children that are attending mainstream primary schools and that we would expect to probably be attending mainstream sports activities.
Yeah.
However, they've obviously got some relatively significant physical impairments in terms of their sporting performance.
Yeah.
So oftentimes these kids are those that when they're much younger, haven't necessarily gone and participated in those early sporting activities like soccer tots or things like that.
Yeah.
So they haven't had that opportunity to grow their confidence and sports skills in a community environment. And by the time they're getting to primary school, they're then a step behind, more than in their physical skills, more importantly in their confidence and their motivation to be continuing to participate in sport. So this really acts as that top up to build that confidence and get them back into the stream of participating in recreational sport and even going on to participate in competitive sport if that's of interest to them.
Yeah. And you've just touched on the confidence side of things there, which I know is an integral part of the physical literacy framework, which, Sports Stars has the physical literacy framework kind of embedded within it. Could you talk to us a little bit about physical literacy and how that fits within Sports Stars?
Yeah, so physical literacy is a wonderful concept that Sport Australia have done a lot of wonderful work in, and there's been some really lovely work in Australia done to look at the global definitions of physical literacy and bring them down into one framework. So the Australian Physical Literacy Framework is the most up-to-date framework on physical literacy, and that includes the physical, social, cognitive and psychological domains. And I think it's really essential that an intervention aiming to improve participation, so not just activity, touches on each of those domains, because if you don't have one of them, then that's going to be the most important barrier to prevent participation. And it's incredibly important because oftentimes if we see a child with cerebral palsy, it can be really natural to go, okay, well, it's their physical skills which are holding them back from participating in sport. But most frequently, it's actually not their physical skills. It's often their confidence, even their cognitive understanding of how to participate in sport, the rules of the sport that they maybe haven't learned in those earlier opportunities, or even their understanding of what sporting activities are available to them. And this paper that we're talking about today actually has a companion paper looking at parent and physio perspectives about the program, which delves more into the family's feelings about the other physical literacy domains as well.
Yeah, and that's such an important consideration, isn't it? You know, when we talk about physical literacy, and often, like you say, interventions will focus on the physical and the skill development side of things, but there's not as much attention on how big a role the confidence to use those skills in the right context kind of comes into it. So like you're saying, a really well-designed program not only has the skill development side of things, but it has, a work around the child's confidence to perform those skills in the right way at the right time, and information about strategy and rules. And like you say, just what's available to them. It's also important in terms of, that long-term participation, isn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
I love how I just hearing both of you guys is talking about that, and it's so holistic, and sometimes you do need to be able to take a step back and go, what are the things that are contributing to it? Because yes, there's environmental, there's all this context. We're really good at looking at those things, but the confidence is such a big part of it, and it's that 6 to 12 range where you're just starting to sort of be with friends and you're just starting to be in that environment. I'm going to digress a little bit because it's something that I remember really clearly because I was born and brought up in Canada. And when I came over to Australia, I was about 10 years old, never swam before really, because I was in the Rocky Mountains. So swimming wasn't really something we needed to do.
No.
I came in the heat of summer and it was swimming carnival. Didn't know how to swim. I could maybe doggy paddle, but everyone had already had so many years of having been in the water and was a confident. So even if I could keep afloat, I had no idea how to actually swim in context with other people. Everyone was really confident. And what did I do? I shied away and went, no, I'm not going to do it. This is not something for me. And then you close it off.
Yeah.
So it just shows how powerful and big and important that sort of stuff is, isn't it? And for our kids with cerebral palsy, it's, that opportunity in the initial days. So it's wonderful you've done work in that area, Georgina.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think we know that especially coming into high school, especially girls, but also boys drop out of sport at alarming rates. And with kids with cerebral palsy, if they're not even in it to begin with, we see that dropout as even more negative. So it's such an important time period to set up lifelong physical activity habits.
Yeah, because that gap only gets wider as they get older, doesn't it?
When we talk about that gap, that real sort of initial gap of why, part of it is skill and physical base, but what's your impression of children of why there is that gap to start off with? Is it because there's not resources out there and available? Is there no, sporting program available early on that they feel they can be included in? What's your gut feeling about what that is? Why do they already start so far behind if it's not just physical?
There's a lot of different reasons there. Yeah. So I think one of the reasons is that in those early ages, so if we think of preschool, kids with cerebral palsy will often have quite a focus on early intervention. And so therefore the time that the family is spending on physical skills is not necessarily in attending sports type activities.
Sure.
And so then they miss out on entering in the stream. And in the protocol paper of Sports Stars, we presented the sports participation framework where children will enter into these early recreational programs like Net, Set, Go and Auskick. So if you're not entering in that stream where everyone's new and no idea what they're doing and everything's very game-based and positive, because you might be focused on therapy or because your parents don't feel confident sending you to a mainstream sports activity or because there may be physical limitations that make it difficult for you to participate. If the coaches aren't comfortable with being able to adapt the activities for children with disabilities, even if there isn't much adaptation that needs doing, if coaches aren't confident, families aren't confident in having their kids attend. There's also the environmental barriers of being able to access the sports field with, say, a walker or something like that if they're at GMFCS Level I-II. There's just so many different barriers that are individual to different families. But I think the biggest part is missing out on getting into the stream with other kids when they're at that same level of
developmental
lack of confidence and development.
And when we talk about, things from a motor development perspective, often we talk about that window of opportunity that you have to be exposed to and start to acquire the skills that you might need to participate in a variety of contexts. So, like you say, if the focus is somewhere different early on, it really does have a long-term impact for those kids, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say we shouldn't be doing early intervention.
No.
Early intervention, absolutely amazing. But it does have some ramifications in terms of where priorities are that we need to consider.
And I think that always comes back down to when we talk about it so much. Hence we're doing the podcast, research works. We want to know where the evidence is. So where can you best spend your time? Where are you going to get your best bang for your buck to meet your needs and goals so you can address the different needs? Because there can be so many options that can be overwhelming. But what are the best options for that child at that time, at that development? So I think that's why it's so important.
So, and remembering your F words as well.
Right.
It's about fun and friends as much as it's about, all of the other aspects of development.
Absolutely. So, Georgina, we've spoken a little bit about sort of the why behind it. And one of the key features that I sort of said earlier as we were introing it, we're like, well, this is a Sports Stars is a practitioner or physiotherapist-led intervention, peer group sports, land-based, participation-focused. And there were sort of 8 weekly 1-hour sessions. Can you give us a bit of an idea? I know this is going to be like a summary of all summaries. I know you've got your protocol paper, but what would a session look like? Like, how are you building in, the physical activity literacy skills in a session, or how are you progressing that over the 8 weeks? Just a bit of a snapshot, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. As a big, broad view, we do one sport is a focus for each week, and we do 2 weeks of each sport. So over the 8 weeks, there's 4 sports that we focus on.
Great.
In this study, we looked at soccer, netball, t-ball and cricket, which are the 4 most popular team sports in Australia in terms of participation numbers. In another study, I've looked at for Sports Stars in rural areas. We looked at what was available in that specific rural area and changed up the sports based on that. And I think that's really important.
Yeah.
And then in each session, we have a 10-minute welcome session, so where the families turn up, the kids have the opportunity to start talking to each other and interacting. Families have a chance to, ask the physio about how their AFO prescription's going and run a couple of minutes late and whatnot. Yeah. And that really mimics what would happen in a community sport situation where you have that bit of arrival time requiring free, unstructured play and interaction.
Yeah.
And then we move on to the warm-up, where it's looking at warming up physically, but as well socially. So starting to be interacting with the other children a little bit more, working on knowing each other's names, starting to introduce some different rules of basic games, and getting the blood pumping and the range of motion going. Then we move on to focusing on some of the actual physical skills. So the first section is looking at the locomotor skills of the sport of the week. Yeah. So say with soccer, that would be really looking at running, weaving, and things like that. So lots of moving between cones. And there are in the program, there's progressions and regressions for every single activity. So the cones can get further apart, or they're asked to do it more quickly, or it starts to include interactions like doing relay races and things like that. And then the next 15 minutes is focusing on the object control skills of the week. So we'd start looking at, for soccer, things like dribbling, trapping, kicking into a goal. Yeah. And then finally, we have the participation section where we run a modified sports game. So because we only have in this study 4 to 6 participants, it is obviously not going to look like a real world soccer game. But if it's a less advanced group, we might start with the kids all playing on one team and kicking the ball to each other up the field and then into the goal. If it's a more advanced group, they might be doing a 2-on-2 game where they're trying to get the ball into their goal, and we might keep score. Yeah. And then a cool down where we usually do some yoga based on animal poses to try and bring the kids all back down to a regulated level for them to go home and do their homework and whatnot. Because we usually do this after school, as most school sports are. So we need to calm them back down before sending them away with their families.
Well thought through.
Love a good bit of animal pose yoga. It's very handy tool to have in the in the toolkit. Yeah. So Georgina, let's talk a little bit about the science of the study now. And your study design was a randomised waitlist-control trial, and your assessors were blinded throughout. Could you just talk to us a bit about how this was operationalised? So how you actually ran those groups over the course of your study?
Yeah, so we ran groups across Queensland, and so I was the blinded assessor for all the groups. So it involved quite a few road trips with my dad up to Rockhampton and Hervey Bay from Brisbane, which was quite great, fitting all the equipment for the TGMD2 and the GMFM-Challenge in my little Nissan Micra, which
really testing the limits of that.
And so one of my supervisors, Megan Auld, she did the randomisation of the actual group. So she knew who was in each group. I didn't. And there was a lot of time spent warning the families when I was doing the assessments. Do not tell me if you've had the intervention. Don't tell me anything about it. Really important. And so each assessment session was around 2 hours long. So they were quite extensive assessments. And we did them pre-post and 12 weeks post. And we've actually just completed as well a follow-up 3 years after the intervention, looking at the goals, though, because it was mid-COVID. So looking at the goals and collecting some qualitative information as well. So we had some really positive outcomes there that they still had statistically significant improvements in those goals 3 years after intervention.
Wow, that's really interesting. And I love the story of how you collected data. I think we all remember stories like, you do whatever you can, you do everything you can. And you had quite a range of measures. So you must be very good at doing a lot of these outcome measures at this point. So there was a few things I wanted to ask you about some of the outcome measures, because you had a lot of them in terms of like physical competence, but also goal setting. And I wanted to ask you about the modified COPM. What makes it modified? Can you describe that a little bit to us?
Yeah, so whereas the typical COPM would collect information about a broad range of domains, we asked children and their families to set sports-specific goals. So we had one goal relating to their activity performance and one relating to participation. At that stage, we didn't tease out attendance and involvement. That's something we've done in future studies to separate those. They just had to set one participation that related to either attendance or involvement. So, that was the modification of the COPM, is that it had to be sports-focused goals because we really don't expect sports stars to show us big improvements in things like self-care. It wouldn't have been a very useful measure to take.
Yeah, I like how that was really targeted. And I like how you also used the CAPE, so the Children's Assessment of Participation Enjoyment. So this really looked at sort of general participation, sports specific. How did you find that as a measure? Was it relatively easy to administer? And how long would it take for families to complete that question?
Yeah, the CAPE was probably one of our most challenging assessments, actually. We had a lot of workbooks not returned, go missing, not completed at the right dates, and families found it very, very lengthy and difficult to complete. Not that it was difficult to actually do, but just the time taken and the reflection on those last few months, they reported as quite challenging to do accurately. Another thing that was challenging about the CAPE is it does have a lot of sports and physical recreation specific items in it, but they're spread across a number of the different categories within the CAPE. So there's not one category that we could take out to look at sport-specific participation. And that's actually something I'm working on at the moment, is developing an assessment of sport-specific or sport and physical recreation-specific participation for kids with disabilities. And we conducted a Delphi study with an honours student on that. And hopefully we'll move towards getting an actual targeted assessment, because we weren't really able to see from the CAPE whether there was that improvement. We didn't see improvement over the overall CAPE for general participation, which makes sense based on the specific nature of this program.
Yeah, sure.
And in terms of kind of gross motor assessments, one of the things that you used was the test of gross motor development, the second edition. That is an assessment I am very familiar with, having done it, I would say, hundreds of times now. And there's obviously a locomotor component and an object control skill component to that test. But they have quite, in terms of, I suppose, becoming skilled in administering that test, you have to often go through a lot of iterations of it to become competent. Do you have any ideas about how or ways that we can kind of upskill and train therapists to be able to use that assessment?
Yeah, I actually love the TGMD, and the third edition's now available.
Yes.
And we've started looking at some reliability of doing the TGMD3 with kids with disabilities live versus video recording.
Oh, fantastic.
Which is, really, really great in these COVID times. But as well, we actually used it with our rural study. So it's been great for that. I really like it because the instructions are really clear, and once you've done some assessments, it's actually very quick to do as live as you're going, and the whole assessment only takes around 15 minutes. There's some really lovely training material online from Dave Ulrich, who's the creator, which goes through the common mistakes that are made in scoring the test, as well as there are 4 training videos that you can actually do assessments of the children in that those videos. They're, I believe, typically developing kids, but they're fantastic there. And it also has Dave going through each of the activities, how to instruct it and how to do it. So it's a wonderful resource that's just available on YouTube, and would highly encourage everyone to take a look if they're looking at doing it.
Absolutely.
That's for the TGMD3, but most of the items for the TGMD2 are the same. There's just a couple that have been adapted.
Yep. And you can get the information straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because, like you say, he is the actual test developer. So it's so, it's not often that you have access to that level of information and instruction from the person who actually developed the tool. So, I would encourage anyone who wants to use it to go and access that.
That's great.
And for free as well. It's a relatively affordable assessment because you just have to buy the test papers and manual. The test kit is made up of really common sports items that you can use whatever you've got already, or can quite easily purchase for a minimal cost.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think you had a whole range of other assessments. I don't want to go into all of them because I think people are quite familiar with that. But I thought that was a really good one to look into. And you had a range of, you've got, like we said at the beginning, the GMFM and the tug and some sprinting tests as well. But I guess my question around a lot of that was, well, first of all, a statement. It was great to see that you had so many descriptions about the minimal detectable difference. Yes. I love that you did report that for so much of this work. And I guess my question to you from there is, why is it so important for therapists to know what that minimal detectable change is?
Yeah, it was really important for us to report that wherever we could. And so that tells us what change we would need to expect for it to be a real change that's actually happened. Yeah. So it's not just by chance or by error that change has been detected, but it's actually really there.
Yeah.
In addition to the minimal detectable change, it was also really important for us to talk about the clinically significant difference. Yep. So that's not only can we detect it, but is the change that we've detected actually meaningful to the child?
Yeah.
So the example of if they're running faster and we can detect they're running 2 seconds faster over the muscle power sprint test, does that actually have any meaningful change to the child's performance and participation? And sometimes it's yes, and sometimes it might be a much larger amount that's needed for it to be clinically significant.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that's so important because, if you're going to do these assessments, if you're going to do them, you need to understand what those changes are. Otherwise, it's really difficult to interpret whether you've made any impact or not, or whether the child is just improving on their own, or, whatever that might be. So.
Yeah. And obviously, statistical significance is always an important component of scientific literature. But like you say, that the clinical significance of what you're actually achieving with interventions like this, that's just as important.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
So, Georgina,
definitely.
Let's move on to some of your results, and we'll get you to talk us through some of the key things that you found in this paper. And I thought we could start with participation, and you could talk us through what you found with your modified COPM.
Yeah, so we saw clinically significant improvements in children's participation-focused goals. And so that was statistically and clinically significant. And that means changes over 2 points or over on the COPM. Yep. And so we saw that really consistently, and that was retained at the 12-week follow-up, which is really wonderful to see. And as I said, it was retained 3 years post follow-up as well, which is amazing. Like that's the real point of this study, is that it was going to elicit long-term change. And so to be able to show that is so wonderful for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess that just really highlights that it really meets a need and that families, parents, they see value in it if they can report that. So now then, can you talk us through some of the other results when it came to the physical activity competence side of things?
Yeah, so we saw statistically and clinically significant improvements in the TGMD. So one thing that's really lovely as well about the TGMD 2 and 3 is that it covers the same skill areas as ACARA does in the physical education component of primary school. So we know that it's looking at those physical skills that are very relevant to our education system. So we saw those improvements that were different between our control and our intervention group. The GMFM-Challenge module, we didn't see significant differences between the two groups, but when we looked at the just pre and post measures, we did see a statistically significant improvement in the intervention group that we didn't see in the control group. So it just may have been that we didn't have quite enough power in the study to be able to detect that change there. What was interesting, I think, about those two assessments, which both look at really high-level gross motor skills, is that the TGMD is so focused on sports skills, and it really looks at both physical skill, like their ability to physically do it, but also their cognitive understanding of how to do these specific sports skills. And I think that's one of the reasons why sports stars did such wonderful improvements in that, is because we learnt those specific skills in the group, and so children improved in them really obviously. Whereas the challenge module is it's got a lot larger section on balance and coordination and quality of movement and things like that, and much fewer sports specific skills.
And you noted in your paper that the nature of the skills performed in Sports Stars it was quite task specific, wasn't it? So, and the focus being on participation and not necessarily, fitness or things like that. So could you just expand on that a little bit and talk about how that was reflected in your results?
Absolutely. And I think that's, you talked about the large number of assessments that we did. The ones that we haven't talked about yet, which didn't have statistically significant improvements, were those that were specifically measuring fitness. And so that is actually expected, because we had an 8-week program with 8 hours of intervention. We don't actually expect children to improve their fitness levels within that. What we would hope, and what we had hoped to do at this 3-year mark, but, COVID, would be to see improvements at this stage after they've transitioned into community sport and have done ongoing physical activity in the long term. So we didn't see those improvements in fitness, but that almost confirmed the fact of what we were focusing on, which was the participation and the activity competence, and what we weren't focusing on, which was actually fitness at this stage. It's to get kids into the activities that then have the chance to build their fitness and overall health and well-being.
I love that take on things.
Same. I love that so much. It's just, task specificity is just so relevant. It doesn't matter where you look into, and if you're going to do this in terms of the reason why you do it and really educating families about why you'd engage in this as opposed to something else and what to expect to see, I think this just gives a really good idea of, having to manage expectations. No, they're not going to be able to run faster in it, but guess what? They're going to get the confidence and skills to be part of a sporting team, and that'll get them out there, and then they can be part of it, and that's participation, and it's so cool.
And those fitness improvements being secondary to becoming a more physically literate individual.
Absolutely, because it's that lifelong physical activity that makes such a big difference. So I would much rather do an intervention that has lifelong consequences than one that really improves fitness in the short term, but then stops.
It's not sustainable.
And I guess the other huge appeal of this in the land that we live in, when we, needing to justify funding and NDIS and all those kinds of things, like this is really quite a low dosage intervention for the kind of outcomes that you're getting. Have you got any tips or recommendations for therapists who are helping families to maybe advocate for hours to do something like this? Or, have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it really hits on one of the NDIS's real favourite things, which is value for money. And as you said, it's really low dose. It's a group intervention as well. So it's even lower therapist need compared to individual therapy. And also we know from the research that continuing to participate in sport in the long term decreases our need for as much one-on-one physiotherapy or other therapies and decreases our need for other healthcare in the future. So it's a real long-term program to reduce the cost of intervention. It's also really focused on what children's goals often are, which is participating, or families' goals, participating in sport and culturally and age-appropriate participation activities. As well as being just a really fun and engaging activity. So we had really, really high attendance in the group. The only times we didn't have people attend was when there was significant illness or hospitalizations or things like that. So, just a really value for money program.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah. So, Georgina, this work has kept you and probably continues to keep you really busy. It sounds like, just through our conversation, you've talked about lots of other kind of projects that have evolved from this work, which is so exciting. So I'm hoping to finish off, you can give us a bit of a summary about kind of where to from here for Sports Stars.
Yeah, so as I said, we're looking at investigating sports stars in different groups of children with disabilities. We expect that to show similarly positive results, but as we've talked about with NDIS, it's really good to have that data published to be able to provide evidence to support that. Also looking at, I'm looking at Sports Stars Splash, so a swimming-based program down in Tasmania of all places.
Cool.
And then my next big thing is on upskilling therapists to be able to provide sports stars. So putting together some training programs and online community of practice so that therapists can access sports stars resources and be able to implement it more widely so that we can get this out there for Australian kids to be able to transition into community sport more readily.
Oh, it's brilliant.
Love it. I love it so much. Well, Georgina, we're not done yet. We do have the next most important section to go into. As informative as that was, I think it's going to get more informative. We're about to head into the Tell It to Ed segment. And as you all know, Ed does not have a background in child health, but he has been listening very intently, taking notes most of the time. And Georgina, this is really just an opportunity to be able to describe your research in about 60 seconds or so to someone who doesn't have a background in science or child health. And in turn, Ed will have an opportunity for a question. So take it away, Georgina.
Fantastic. So we know that children with disabilities don't participate in physical activity, particularly sport, as much as children without disabilities. This is a problem because we know how important physical activity is to a healthy and happy life, and that even children with disabilities without disabilities aren't getting the recommended amounts of physical activity. So kids with disabilities, it's a really important focus area. The barriers to sport for children with disabilities are way more varied than just their physical ability, though of course their physical ability is really important. So Sports Stars is a short-term group intervention that focuses on not only developing children's physical skills, but on helping them to build confidence, understand how sport is played and how to work with their teammates, and to be motivated to continue participating in the long term. Sports Stars is unique in that it's such a low-dose program that aims to get children participating in community sport, which is where the real lifelong benefits of enjoyable physical activity can happen. So it's the jumping platform for greater things in the future for these kids.
Oh, wonderful summary.
Love it.
Wow, that's very, very cool.
Hello, Ed. Well, do you have a question for Georgina?
Oh, I always have questions, but I guess I love the whole idea that therapy and medicine is thinking very long term, and it's not all about the short term solutions. And I'm kind of curious. Obviously, you've touched upon the fact that even children without disabilities are really not getting involved in sport in a long term way, or really kind of making some lifelong choices along the way. And obviously all the benefits that sports provides. There's a lot of support from sport ambassadors and representatives to encourage kids to go into sports. But is there some value to ambassadors being more specific towards the sector that obviously does take care of kids with disabilities? Is there some legs to an ambassador kind of really promoting that?
Oh, good question. Over to you.
Absolutely. I think improving the visibility of kids with disabilities in sport is really important. And that's one of the really important aims of the Paralympics. Unlike the Olympics, which is looking at high performance, the Paralympics, one of their primary aims is to increase the visibility of sport for people with disabilities. And it's meant to choose sports that would then be available within the country or community that the Paralympics is being held in that year. And that's really wonderful. But I think there's a bit of a focus on that real high level performance for Paralympic athletes, whereas kids with disabilities who might be more like a typical kid who just wants to go out and, kick a ball and play with their friends, and they're never going to be an elite athlete. They just want to have fun and to have the benefits of physical activity. We don't really have a lot of visibility of what that looks like. And so you can't be it if you can't see it. So having ambassadors either with disabilities themselves who are not sports people, so who may be actors or writers or things like that, and seeing their participation in recreational level sport, or other people without disabilities really platforming kids with disabilities that are participating at level, I think is really important. I think we also have a wonderful opportunity at this time with the Olympics coming to Brisbane in 2032 to really start focusing on growing those levels of participation for Paralympic sport and recreational sport in Australia at this time. So it's a great time to be in this area.
Oh. Good question, Ed. That was great.
Thank you.
As always.
That's so true. It is continuing at this point, and it's just, this track record. Well, thank you so very, very much, Georgina. It was wonderful to speak with you, and there was a lot of great take-homes with that, wasn't there, Ash?
Yeah, I think we could talk to you all day about this and, have a really rich and meaningful conversation. But unfortunately, we have to leave it there for now.
We do.
Yeah, we've got lots more things to talk to you about in the future.
Oh, absolutely. And remember, to all of our listeners, you can access any information about Georgina and the link to the paper as well on our website, researchworks.net. And remember, you can always fill out the CPD form there as well if you want to keep this as a record for your CPD. But I don't really want to say goodbye, but I guess we have to say goodbye. Thanks so much, Georgina. I hope you had fun today.
Thank you. It was wonderful. And we'll get to another Oz Academy conference in person again soon, I'm sure.
Oh, that'll be wonderful.
Yeah. Right, looking forward to it.
Until then, we'll see you in person. But for now, thank you so much. And to everyone, thanks for listening. And we'll talk to you all again next week. Bye.
Bye.